The subject for today is the concept of learned helplessness. Now, part of the definition of learned helplessness is having no control or agency in your life. And that would lead to cognitive, emotional, and motivational deficits. Now, as you can see, that would affect every area of somebody's life, and it's extremely difficult to rise above if a person has those types of deficits. It also affects society at large a lot also. Now, the actual definition is learning to accept and to endure unpleasant situations while choosing to not take positive action even when better options exist. Now, the first thought might be, why would somebody do that? If better options exist, why wouldn't you do something about it? And we see this a lot, and I think society at large also talks about it a lot because they do it in a very judgmental way. They'll say, well, why does this person not do that? Why does this person not do that? And there's some very deep-seated issues of why this happens. So this term is also known as toxic passivity or the victim mentality. And this will always lead to anxiety, depression, apathy, and sometimes drug use. The original study by Martin Seligman was in 1967, and fortunately it gave us some really good ideas about this concept. On the negative side, his studies are extremely unethical. They were done on dogs, so I'm going to go over this study for you. And I'm going to use some props here just so I can show you a little bit better on what the studies were. Now, I don't have dogs. Well, I do have dogs, but we're not going to use them for the study here. And for my props, we're going to use lions because that's what I had. I had lions, so we're going to use that. And we're going to use this stapler here as the fence or the guardrail that they could jump over. So this is basically how the study works. So in the beginning, they took, let's see if I can balance this. All right, they took two dogs and they put them on this grid right here. And they just left them there. And that was it. That's part one. So then they take them off. Then they take another set of dogs and they put them on the grid. Now this grid can create an electric shock. So what Martin Seligman and his helpers did was basically electrocute these dogs. And in this particular group 2, there were levers up here. So as soon as they started to get electric shocks, they were able to figure out, and they were able to take their noses or their hands or their paws and push the levers to stop the electricity from happening, and they wouldn't get hurt anymore. And so that's round 2. Then they would take them out. Now round 3. Now these dogs were starting to get electrocuted, but their levers didn't work, and there was no way out. And so after that, well, they didn't kill them, but they certainly did what you could think. You know, they hurt them enough. And what they were learning is that they had no power, agency, or control over the shocks. And so they took them out. So now here's the second half of the study. They brought back the original dogs that they just put there and they did nothing with. They just left them there. So now they have no information in terms of positive or negative. Everything is neutral. So then they have this, it was called a shuttle box. So they had the grid on one side and a safe side on the other, and a barrier in the middle. When these dogs started to get shocked, it took them a little bit, but they figured out, we need to get out of here. And they jumped over, and they figured out the problem. So they were safe. Then they took the round 2 dogs. And these are the dogs that got shocked, but were able to hit the lever. So they knew that they had some power and some agency because they had prior knowledge that what they can do makes a difference in the world. They can actually figure stuff out. So when they were shocked, not only did they have access to be able to turn it off over here, but they said, forget it, we're just going to jump over here and be totally safe. And that's what they did. Now, the third group was the dogs that got shocked but could not figure it out because there was no way that they could figure out. They had no access to be able to stop the electric shocks. So they had learned helplessness. Now, when these dogs got shocked, they never thought to jump over the barrier. What they did was they lied down and they whimpered and they waited for help. And obviously that's unethical. But here's the other interesting part, if you're still with me on this unethical study here. When these dogs were enticed to jump on this side with treats, they still stayed down and they didn't do anything. When these dogs were met with punishment for staying over here, their concept was the evil we know is better than the evil we don't know. So they lied down and whimpered again, and they still didn't do anything. So the next part, they had to be literally picked up and lifted over the barrier and put down. And back, and back, and back. Numerous times for them to finally figure out that they could kind of, with some effort and being scared and nervous, still get to the other side. All right, enough of that. But what do we learn? What we learn is that it's learned helplessness, yes, but the dogs that were able to hit the lever or to be able to jump over, and they understood that they had agency and power, they learned that they have control. So it's learned control as well. The dogs in the third group were never given the option to be able to figure it out to stop the pain from happening. So they learned to be helpless. And in the end, what happened with these dogs were it wasn't enough to give them a treat. It wasn't enough to, I don't want to say harm them again, they were already harmed, but to give them something negative, nothing would make them move. Now, how does this affect people? Well, let's take a look at this. Is there a benefit to somebody, let's say, changing a portion of their life to get better? Of course there is. But everybody on the outside would wonder, why is this person not making the positive changes needed in order to change their life? And here you go. Here's a reason why. Because when you think that everything you do comes out negative and that what you do makes no difference in the world, you're going to have toxic passivity, and this is what happens. So whether you give somebody a reward or whether there's a punishment, they're going to stay with the evil that they know as opposed to the possible evil that they don't know, because they don't look at the positive, they look at the negative. So let's take a look at this a little bit further. We can break this down. We can break it down to pessimistic thinking and optimistic thinking. And we can look at that over 3 domains. And the 3 domains are permanent, pervasive, and personal. So let's give an example. Last week I did a show on going to college. So let's take an example of somebody going to math class and they do poorly on the first test in their math class. If you have pessimistic thinking and we run it through the domain of permanence, they're going to think, I'll never do well. And through the pervasive domain, they would say, well, it affects everything. Obviously, I'm not going to do well on this math test because I don't do anything that well. I've not achieved success anywhere, so I'm expecting that I'm going to fail the test. And in terms of personal, you might say, well, it's not just a test, it's me. I'm obviously too stupid to learn anything. So if you see somebody that has the thought that they're too stupid to learn anything, and everything they do is going to be wrong, and everything that they ever done they perceive as being wrong, it's going to be very difficult to achieve any type of success. So let's take the other side of that. Let's take optimistic thinking, and again, run it through the domains. First domain, permanent. If a person with optimistic thinking fails a math test on the first math test in this class, they might say, well, it's not permanent. There's like 5 more tests to go. Not a big deal. I'll just make it back the next time. Not a problem. So pervasiveness, does it work through everything? Well, no. They could say, well, it's just one simple math test. I do a lot of things well, and I tend to do things really well when I put more time and effort behind it. And if I put more time and effort into this and prioritize, my grades will go up. Not a big deal. So let's run it through the domain of personal. Well, this person is not going to feel like they're a bad human being or they're stupid as a human because they failed one test. What they might say is, all right, let me get my priorities in order, and it's not a big deal. I'm perfectly capable of doing well on this test. Let's do this again next week. I can't wait. So a person like that, of course, is going to have much more chance of being successful. So one of the questions that should come up here is, where do you see learned helplessness created? Because maybe if we put some time and effort behind it, that's where we can really stop these problems from happening before they start. And so where we see probably, I can't put them in any order because there's a lot of problems here, but where you see it is in a home environment that's very invalidating, abusive, neglectful, where they have no power over their situation. They're not given any type of power, or they're not allowed to make any decisions, and even if they did, they wouldn't matter. And they're not given any support by anybody. They're not given that pat on the back or encouragement that they may need. So a person like that is going to feel like they're helpless. And on the other side of that, where you see it a lot, I really look up to this one guy. Well, I look up to a lot of people, but here's one. Dr. George Albee. Now, he was the head of the American Psychological Association for a while, and part of his work was to say that the root causes of learned helplessness is social deprivation, which includes poverty, racism, sexism. And whenever you see people with limited power, agency, and the ability to change their situations. And I think this is important because we have to look at it. It's not just an individual problem. This becomes a societal problem. For example, I tend to see myself as a person that has a lot of strength and a lot of agency and a lot of power. I can't tell you from where all that came from, but I do know growing up from a poor family that it seemed like everybody else had all the money. And it seemed like no matter how much my family worked, they were still in the same position. And you hear this over and over again in society, that the people who do well or make a lot of money or they have some type of success are people who do the right thing at the right time and they work hard. Well, I don't think I've ever known harder workers than my mother and my father. And certainly they didn't make bad decisions. I've never seen my father drink or certainly never get drunk, and same thing with my mother. So that whole idea that people say, well, it's always their fault, they're not working hard enough, they're lazy, they spend it all on drugs and alcohol, they're partying all the time. Personally, from my experience, I never saw that. I saw people breaking their back and working hard all the time, multiple jobs. And it just seemed like good things went to other people, and there's some reasons for this, right? But when you're growing up, it was very difficult to look at life this way, to think, well, what can I possibly change? How am I going to be able to afford, a house or the things that, let's say, quote unquote, normal people had? So this leads me to, again, I'm the world's biggest Who fan. Peter Townsend also has influenced me a lot. And in this type of sense, in a very artistic way, He said, how can those who have never seen the light be enlightened? And I think that's an interesting concept, because when you're doing therapy on people that have never achieved success, and they may have generations of poverty, how do you get somebody like that to see the light at the end of the tunnel, to tell them if you work hard enough, it'll be there for you, when everybody they know works hard? So that seems like a lie in itself. So it's a very, very hard needle to thread, so to speak. And I've got a lot of ideas on how to help with learned helplessness and how to get past it, but that's going to be for another show. So I just want to talk about some basics today. But again, George Albee says, we have to address issues in society first, including education, housing, drug abuse, and nutrition, and equal opportunity, not equal outcomes. So racism, sexism, even classism, all of this comes into place that makes people feel helpless, without agency, without strength, without how much work they can do, and it still gets nothing done. So what Dr. Albee was also mentioning is that if we just do therapy on individuals, it's kind of like a cash grab, because there's thousands upon thousands of people that need help with mental disorders, but yet very few therapists. So if you really want to stop the problem from happening down the road, you have to handle societal issues, and then there'll be less and less people that actually need help. Because the main causes of mental disorders in this country is not just out of nowhere. It's poverty, it's unequalness. All of those lead to depression, and it leads to anxiety and all the issues we're talking about. So today I didn't really want to talk about how to fix the problem, because it's such a big issue. I want to talk about that at another time, but I do want to leave you with this, because I want to leave you with something good here. Believe it or not, one of the biggest strategies in order to make sure that people do have strength and agency, and it ends feeling helpless, and there's a lot of studies on this, is to actually work out. It's the easiest thing you can do. From an anecdotal point of view, I've been a trainer for over 30 years. I've been training for 40. And I can tell you, just the fact of joining a gym and walking in the front door gives you agency, because that's a choice. And that's the first thing you need to do to start down the road to rise above. Now, when you actually start to go to the gym, every time you start up your car, you're doing something positive for yourself, and nobody can take that away from you. I don't care if you're a millionaire or you don't have 2 pennies to rub together. Nobody can stop you from walking, from running, from doing a Stairmaster, from lifting weights. And if you do this repetitively, it creates self-esteem. It creates that you know that you have power and agency over your life. And on the more scientific side, let's talk about neurochemicals. It raises your dopamine. It raises your serotonin. We know this for sure. For that, there is empirical evidence. So the more you work out, the more of a better chance you have of ending your feelings of helplessness. Now, quick little talk on raising your dopamine and your serotonin. You don't have to go very far to figure it out. That working out is not the only thing that makes you have agency. You can have any hobby. Pick something. The main thing here is to choose something and have positive action to move forward. And don't worry about the goal at the end. The goal should be just to do it. I hate to sound like a Nike commercial, but that's the point of the whole thing. People who are helpless have passive problems. They don't do enough. It's toxic passivity, and they don't move, and they don't do positive actions for themselves. They don't know how to advocate for themselves. So this is the right thing to do. I'll have more of it at a later date. But hopefully you enjoyed this show. I am Joseph Peroni from the Rise Above Project. And if you'd like, subscribe, and even better, tell a friend. Thank you.